Have you ever felt like there's like a hidden world of knowledge out there? Like something just beyond our reach, you know?
Yeah.
Whispers of ancient wisdom and those teachings that hint at something bigger.
Oh, absolutely. It's like catching a glimpse of like a secret code. It makes you want to unlock the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And in this deep dive, we're going to try and crack that code, at least a little bit. We're taking a look at some glimpses of occultism, theosophical wisdom from the ancient mysteries to modern spiritual science. It's a collection of lectures from the early 1900s.
Fascinating stuff. What's so cool about it is how it uses this theosophical perspective to like bridge the gap between ancient spiritual traditions and, well, modern ideas about consciousness in the unseen world.
Occultism, I mean, the word itself just screams mystery.
It does. And these lectures, they were delivered between 1902 and 1903, and they cover a lot of ground.
Oh, yeah? Like what?
Well, they explore the nature of humanity, like the idea that we have these different levels of being, and they go into reincarnation and what might happen after we die.
Okay, getting deep.
They even touch on stuff like telepathy and clairvoyance.
Whoa, psychic stuff.
And, maybe most importantly, they look at the relationship between theosophy and established religions like Christianity and Buddhism.
Oh.
Oh, and they touch on spiritualism and magic, too.
So basically a whole buffet of occult ideas.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm in. So where do we even start with all of this?
Well, how about we tackle a potentially tricky one right off the bat? Theosophy and Christianity. Some folks might think they clash.
Yeah, I can see that. So how did these lectures approach that?
Well, they address it head on. To understand the theosophical view, you need to grasp its basic principles. There's this book, An Outline of Theosophy, which lays out 3 fundamental truths, and then like the corollaries and the results of those truths. This forms the basis for how they look at Christianity.
So it's like a lens.
Exactly.
So it's not like Theosophy is saying Christianity is wrong. It's more like they're saying, hey, there are many ways to interpret Christianity, and we're going to use these principles to see it from a different angle.
Right. And they also talk about how churches, how they form. They often start with a really powerful spiritual insight, but then they can become rigid over time.
Yeah, they get stuck in their ways. Happens to the best of us, I guess.
Right. And sometimes maybe their focus shifts to like institutional stuff and,
Yeah.
well, they may be stray from their original spiritual purpose.
It's like anything that becomes an institution, right? It's not specifically about Christianity. It's a broader pattern.
Right.
Okay, so now for the really big ones. Reincarnation and divine justice, right? These are huge ideas in Theosophy, but they might seem kind of off to some Christians.
Definitely. But the lectures make a fascinating point. They argue that those ideas weren't always missing from Christian thought.
Really? So they were there originally, but then got lost.
Well, maybe not lost exactly, but downplayed.
Yeah.
The speaker even delves into biblical interpretations, like Jesus' statement about John the Baptist being Elias. It's in Matthew 11:14.
Right.
And they're like, hey, this could be a straight-up reference to reincarnation. But then, Jesus adds, if you will receive it.
So it's like a subtle hint, like he was putting it out there, but knew not everyone was ready for it.
Exactly. And there's the healing of the blind man in John 9:3. Jesus basically says that the blindness wasn't because of some sin in this life.
Like it wasn't a punishment.
Right. The lectures say that this hints at like a cause that goes beyond this current lifetime, maybe something from a past life affecting the present.
Okay, that's making more sense now.
The speaker even brings up works by Christian thinkers who, in more recent times, have explored reincarnation. They mention From Death to the Judgment Day by an English clergyman and Birth a New Chance by an American Methodist minister.
Interesting. So they're saying, hey, even within Christianity, there's a space for these ideas.
Exactly. And they're not just random fringe ideas either.
Right.
Theosophy emphasizes that even if we don't consciously remember our past lives, the qualities we developed back then, they carry over. They shape us now.
So, like, we're carrying all that baggage, good and bad, from our past lives.
You could say that.
And it's all shaping us in this life.
It's a continuous evolution.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
And get this. They talk about an esoteric side to Christianity itself.
Esoteric, meaning hidden.
Yeah, like a deeper layer of meaning.
Yeah.
Like when Christ talks about revealing the mystery of the kingdom of God to some, but using parables for others. That's in Mark 4.10, 12, and 33, 34. Like he was teaching on different levels.
So inner circle and an outer circle.
Exactly. And the lectures also point out specific terms like dogs and swine in Matthew 7.6.
Isn't that like kind of harsh?
Yeah, but they suggest that it might be more than just insults, maybe coded language meant for people who weren't ready for the deeper stuff.
Like a secret handshake for initiates.
Right. And even the bit about being perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect, in Matthew 5:48, they see it as a hint about spiritual initiation, about achieving a higher state of being.
Okay, I never thought about it that way.
The speaker also brings up St. Clement of Alexandria. He was an early church father. And guess what? He even used Neo-Pythagorean texts about the mysteries of the word.
So even way back then, there was this mixing of different esoteric ideas.
Exactly.
Wow, the early church was a lot more mystical than we often think.
Right. And they talk about how the early church had these 3 stages for its members: purification, illumination,
And
and perfection, also known as deification.
deification, like becoming godlike.
Yeah, reaching that ultimate union with the divine. They point out that in those days, becoming a saint, that was just step 1. Like, it was the foundation for then accessing the deeper wisdom.
So different from how many see sainthood today, like the ultimate goal.
Right. And becoming perfect, as the scripture says that, was about this process of deification. It's actually in a lot of early church writings. Even Professor Harnack, the historian, noted that.
Wow, so is Theosophy trying to rewrite Christianity?
Not really. They're
Yeah.
more about expanding our understanding. They're offering a wider perspective on life, death, and how we relate to the divine.
And the path to that is through personal study, experience, and living by those principles.
Percent.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the connection here.
It's all about piecing it together.
Okay, so you mentioned the ancient mysteries earlier. I have to admit, when I hear that, I picture like shadowy figures and secret rituals.
I mean, there might be some of that,
Yeah.
but these lectures dive into what those mysteries really meant.
So what's the real meaning then?
At their core, it's about that which is hidden. The idea is that throughout history, all these major spiritual and philosophical traditions, including early Christianity, they've had these inner, more esoteric teachings.
But they kept them secret.
Well, not secret exactly, but reserved. Not just anyone could access them.
So like you had to be worthy.
You had to be prepared. They
Yeah.
believed that higher instruction wasn't for everyone, at least not right away. You needed a certain level of moral and intellectual development.
Makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so what were these like mystery schools? Were there specific ones that were, the big names?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The lectures specifically talk about the mysteries of Bacchus and Eleusis in ancient Greece, and those of Egypt and Chaldea, too. It's amazing how little detailed information we have about what went on in those mysteries, though.
You mean like we don't have all the textbooks and instructions?
Right. And that's where the theosophical perspective comes in. The speaker says that we can glean insights from, well, investigations into past lives, since that's a core theosophical concept,
Yeah.
and also from a kind of spiritual memory, traditions passed down through, those esoteric channels.
So it's like piecing together a puzzle with some missing pieces.
Exactly.
And they talk about the lesser and the greater mysteries. Right. So what's the difference?
The lesser mysteries, they were mainly about the consequences of your actions after death and learning to control your desires and passions.
Okay, so like emotional mastery 101.
Right.
And the greater mysteries.
They went deeper. They explore the consequences of your actions in the heaven world and mastering the mind.
So it's about like really understanding how our thoughts and actions ripple outwards.
Exactly.
Wow, so these ancient schools were about so much more than just rituals. They were about like a complete system of understanding the universe and ourselves.
Right. And they have this whole understanding of cosmogenesis and anthropogenesis, too.
Meaning?
The origins and evolution of the universe and humans. Stuff like the 7 great chains of planets and how they all tie into our solar system.
Whoa.
Heady stuff.
It is. But they had ways of explaining these complex ideas, like using the example of a germ developing into an organism.
Okay, that makes it more relatable.
Exactly. It shows this idea of correspondences between the different levels of reality.
And who could forget that image of the baby Bacchus with his toys?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
The spinning top, representing the atom, the 5 platonic solids for the atoms of different planes, a ball for the earth, and a mirror for astral matter. It's like a crash course in cosmology and metaphysics all in one image. So much symbolism packed in there. It's like they were trying to, imprint these ideas on a deeper level.
Right, like an intuitive understanding.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've gone from Christianity to ancient mystery schools, all filtered through this theosophical lens. What else do these lectures cover?
Well, let's talk about Buddhism.
Okay, ancient wisdom from the East now.
They start with Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha himself. They tell his story, the privileged upbringing, sheltered life in the palace. Then he encounters suffering, sees old age, sickness, death, and it totally shakes him.
And that leads him to renounce everything and seek truth.
Exactly. First, he tries hanging out with those ascetic Brahmins, but their hardcore self-denial doesn't do it for him.
6 years of that, and he's like, nope, not the answer.
And then, boom, he gets it. The lectures emphasize this one verse from the Dhammapada that basically sums up his whole teaching. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, cleanse your own heart. This is the teaching of the Buddhas.
Short, sweet, and to the point.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is that Buddha really emphasized common sense and personal verification.
So it's not about blind faith.
Nope. They mentioned the Vaisali Council, where they decided that only teachings that made logical sense could be attributed to Buddha.
Wow, so even back then, they were all about critical thinking.
Oh, totally. And there's that famous quote from the Kalama Sutta, where it basically says, don't believe something just because some authority figure said it, or it's in a book, or it's a tradition. Figure it out for yourself.
That's remarkably modern, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, so what else about Buddhism did they highlight?
Well, they pointed out that Buddhism doesn't have a strict creed, dogma, rituals, or a whole priestly system. It's all about individual responsibility, creating your own destiny within, the laws of righteousness.
So it's a very individualistic path.
Right. And they talk about how Buddha recognized that not everyone's at the same level. He taught using parables and stories for everyday people.
Meeting people where they're at.
Exactly. Then for the monks, he had the Vinaya Pitaka, the code of conduct. And for the really advanced students, he had the Abhidhamma Pitaka, with all the deep philosophical stuff.
Okay, so he was teaching on multiple levels, just like those mystery schools, right?
Exactly.
What about nirvana? That's a big one.
Oh, yeah, and it's often misunderstood as just, like, annihilation. But the lectures clarify that. In Theosophy and Buddhism, nirvana is about transcending the lower self. It's about letting go of the ego and all its attachments.
So it's not about ceasing to exist. It's about evolving beyond our current limitations.
Exactly. And the lectures explain that the good qualities you develop, they don't just vanish, they carry on, just in a more refined form.
So the best parts of you live on. I like that.
Me too.
Okay, so any other interesting tidbits from the Buddhist section?
Oh yeah, they mentioned the Dharmaslawa, the preaching hall, and the chanting of Pirit, protective verses. And they share some gems from the Mahamangala Sutta. It talks about like the greatest blessings, ethical conduct, charity, self-discipline, and ultimately reaching nirvana.
So basically a guide to living a good life.
Right, and they illustrate the idea of reincarnation with a story about an ascetic who remembers his past lives.
Always love a good past life story.
They also point out how Buddhism agrees with Theosophy and other Indian traditions on the idea that the soul's reality is relative. It's about contact, the relationship between the soul and the world.
Interesting. And finally, they share some verses from the Dhammapada. They talk about the power of thoughts, overcoming hatred with love, focusing on inner purity over outward stuff, and the joy of good deeds.
It's a really beautiful and practical path.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered Christianity, ancient mysteries, and Buddhism. What's next in our Theosophical tour?
Well, how about we journey into the unseen world? Man and his bodies. That's the next section.
Okay, sign me up.
They basically argue that the unseen world isn't some separate place, but rather a continuation of our world. It's just that we need to develop our latent senses to perceive it.
Makes sense. Like dogs can hear frequencies we can't, right?
Exactly. They're picking up on something that's there but outside our normal range.
Okay, I'm following you.
They also point out that religions haven't always done the best job of explaining the unseen world.
Like it can come off as a bit unscientific or even contradictory.
Right. And they say that's why some people, especially those who are scientifically minded, become skeptical. But they make a case that those who are intelligent and trained in scientific thinking should be the ones who can actually understand the evidence for this unseen reality.
Okay, that's an interesting take. So how do they present this evidence then?
Well, they use the analogy of the physical world itself. They point out that even within what we call the material realm, there are things we can't see, like the ether. It carries light vibrations, but it's invisible.
So they're saying there could be other finer levels of matter that we just don't perceive with our normal senses.
Right, like astral and mental matter. And even though we can't see them, they still have a real impact on us.
Okay, so we need to expand our idea of what's real. So how do we even begin to understand these different levels of matter?
Well, they use this cool table that shows how matter gets increasingly refined. based on its vibrational frequency.
Okay, so it's all about vibrations.
Yeah, it goes from slow vibrations, like physical matter, to faster ones, like chemical rays with some unknowns in between, and then to even faster vibrations, like heat, light, and yeah.
X-rays.
Yeah,
So they're suggesting a whole spectrum of reality beyond what we normally see.
exactly. And they talk about the possibility of photographing these vibrations.
Hmm.
They mention the experiments of Dr. Baraduc in Paris.
Hmm.
He claimed to have captured like patterns of lines around a grieving child and a radiating cloud around startled children.
Wow, so emotions have an actual energetic signature.
That's the idea. And then there's the story of Dr. Hasdu and Dr. Estradi in Bucharest. They supposedly achieved telepathic photography.
Telepathic photography, what's that?
Like one person projecting a mental image onto a photographic plate miles away, just through thought.
Whoa, seriously?
It sounds wild, right? If that's true, it would mean consciousness can, like, reach out and interact with the physical world in ways we barely understand.
Mind-blowing. And kind of scary, too, if you think about it.
Definitely makes you think.
Okay, so we've got these unseen levels of reality, these subtle energies. What happens to all of that when we die?
That's where the next section comes in. Life after death. Specifically, purgatory and heaven from the Theosophical viewpoint.
All right, let's dive into the afterlife.
They start by saying that purgatory is not some divine punishment, but the natural consequence of our own actions and desires.
So, like, karma playing out.
Exactly. It's a period of adjustment where you shed those lower parts of yourself that don't belong in the next stage.
Like a cosmic detox.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, makes sense. And what about heaven?
That's the result of our higher actions and aspirations. The spiritual energy we cultivated in life finds its full expression there.
So it's not about judgment, it's about what we bring with us.
Right. And the lectures point out that the principle of conservation of energy applies to the higher planes too. All those noble feelings, the deep love, the aspirations, they don't just disappear. They find their fulfillment in the heaven world.
Okay, so heaven is like a resonance chamber for our best qualities.
I like that. And they use the example of an artist or a poet trying to express their inner vision. They might not be able to fully capture it in the physical world, but the heaven world provides that perfect canvas.
So it's not some vague, ethereal realm, but a place where our higher selves can truly flourish.
Precisely.
And what's really cool is that everyone enters the heaven world according to their capacity for good.
Exactly. It's not about being rewarded or punished, but about experiencing the natural consequences of your inner state.
So we create our own heaven, basically.
In a way, yes.
Okay, that's pretty empowering.
It is. And it leads us nicely to the next point, the nature of proof in Theosophy. They stress that it's all about being reasonable, using common sense.
So not blind faith.
Nope. They warn against any type of occultism that demands blind faith or relies on, like, spooky tricks.
Okay, so use your brain, basically.
Exactly.
I can get behind that. So if it's not about blind faith, how do you know what's true in Theosophy?
Well, true spiritual certainty comes from within. It's often attributed to past life knowledge. Like, you recognize the truth because your soul already knows it, even if your conscious mind doesn't remember.
Like deja vu, but on a soul level.
Exactly.
That's trippy. Okay, so no blind faith. Think for yourself. What else?
They're big on learning and questioning, always expanding your understanding. No single book or authority has all the answers.
Makes sense to me. Okay, so next up, you mentioned telepathy earlier. Is that connected to this unseen world stuff?
Oh yeah, definitely. In this section on telepathy and mind cure, they explain telepathy as this direct communication between mental bodies.
Mental bodies, like our minds have bodies.
Right? It's like an energy body that surrounds and interpenetrates our physical body. And it's where our thoughts and emotions reside. So when we think, we're creating vibrations in that mental body.
Okay, so thoughts are vibrations.
Exactly. And those vibrations radiate outwards. If they hit another person's mental body, they can create similar thoughts in their mind.
So like a mental radio waves.
Right. And the lectures say that clear, focused thoughts have a stronger impact.
So like if I'm just thinking random scattered thoughts, not much is going to happen.
Probably not. But if you really focus your intention, it can have a much stronger effect.
Interesting. Okay, so thoughts are vibrations and they can travel. What else?
Well, they also talk about thought forms. These are like condensed thought energy that can take shape on the subtle planes.
So thoughts can actually create things.
Yeah, but not physical things, like energy formations. They're made from this substance called elemental essence.
Okay, getting a bit esoteric here.
It is. But what's cool is that the nature of the thought determines what the thought form looks like. A loving thought might create a beautiful, glowing form,
And an angry thought.
might create a dark, spiky form.
Yikes. Okay, so we should be careful about what we're thinking.
Exactly. And they talk about how unselfish thoughts act mostly on the mental body, while selfish thoughts affect the astral body, where our emotions are.
So if I'm thinking negative or selfish thoughts, I'm not just hurting myself, I'm potentially sending out those vibes to other people too.
Right. And those negative thought forms can, like, latch onto people's weaknesses.
Yikes, that's a lot of responsibility.
It is. But it also means we have the power to send out positive vibes, too.
Okay, so every thought counts.
Exactly.
And what about mind cure? How does that fit in?
Well, My Cure is all about consciously sending out positive, healing thoughts to help others. It's using the power of thought intentionally. The lectures acknowledge different forms of mind cure, like Christian Science and mental science.
And Theosophy's cool with that.
They're generally supportive, but they might point out some misunderstandings or limitations in those systems. The big idea is that the power of thought isn't new. It's in those ancient religions, too, like Buddhism. They just emphasize using it wisely.
Okay, so be mindful of the power of your thoughts. Use them for good.
Exactly. There's this beautiful theosophical idea about infusing your everyday actions with qualities like love, strength, and courage.
So it's not just about sitting in meditation, it's about bringing those qualities into everything you do.
Exactly. Everyone can send out helpful thoughts, not just psychics or healers.
I like that. It makes it feel more accessible, like we can all make a difference.
Right. And they talk about how mind cure can even help with physical ailments, especially those linked to the nervous system.
So like anxiety and stress.
Yeah, by calming the mind, you can bring the physical body back into balance.
Okay, I'm definitely seeing the connections between the mind and body here.
It's all connected.
Okay, so we've talked about all sorts of unseen forces, from thought forms to telepathy. What about like actual beings on these other planes? Do they exist?
Oh, yeah, they definitely go there. That's the section on invisible helpers, elementals, and nature spirits.
Okay, invisible helpers sounds intriguing.
They start by defining elementals as these temporary creations made from living essence but shaped by human will.
So like they're real, but not in the same way we are.
Right. They're more like energetic constructs. They don't have their own individual evolution or reincarnate. They're kind of tied to the thought or emotion that created them.
So they're like temporary thought forms with a bit more oomph.
Something like that.
Okay, and what about nature spirits?
Those are different. They're described as actual beings evolving alongside us, but they usually have astral or etheric bodies.
So they're real, but invisible.
Exactly. And there are apparently tons of them, all sorts of types.
Wow, a whole invisible world teeming with life.
Right. And they suggest that practical magic, working with those forces, requires a deep understanding of all these different spirits.
So it's not just about waving a wand and saying a spell, there's a whole science to it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got elementals, nature spirits. What other sources of occult power did they mention?
Well, things like etheric pressure, electromagnetic currents,
Yeah.
even energy from the transformation of matter.
So like nuclear energy.
Well, maybe not exactly that, but the idea is that matter contains a huge amount of potential energy.
Makes sense. And did they say anything about like controlling these forces?
Oh yeah, they suggest that a sufficiently developed will can control all these forces.
So it's all about willpower.
That seems to be a key factor.
Okay, what about people who have recently passed? Can they influence these things?
They do mention that, yeah. People in their astral bodies can still be influenced.
Interesting. So the veil between the worlds is pretty thin.
You could say that. Okay, next up, magic. That's a big one. It is. And they dive into magic, both white and black. They even bring up something surprising, the Catholic ritual of holy water consecration.
Really? What do they say about that?
They say it's a form of magical ceremony involving exorcism and magnetization, all done through the priest's will.
Wait, so they're saying holy water is magically charged?
Yeah, basically. And if someone's sensitive enough, they might even perceive the difference.
Wild. Okay, so what about talismans? Are they just superstitions?
They explain them as objects that have been, infused with a specific energy. They can have an effect, especially if the person wearing it believes in it. They even point to Gnostic and Egyptian charms that seem to hold their power for centuries.
Wow, so it's like programming an object with energy.
You could put it that way.
Okay, what about charms and mantras?
Well, while they might have some inherent vibration, they also work by strengthening the will and focusing the mind.
So it's like the words or the object act as a focal point for your intention.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Now for the big one, black magic. Is it as evil as it sounds?
They actually make a distinction. Black magic isn't necessarily evil for evil's sake. It's more about using magic for selfish purposes.
So, like manipulating others for your own gain.
Exactly. They give examples of, like, primitive witchcraft and rituals aimed at getting wealth or power. Some of them involve pretty dark stuff, like using blood sacrifices.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely crossing a line.
It is. And then they clarify what psychic powers actually are.
Okay, so what's the deal with psychic powers?
They basically say those powers come from the astral or etheric parts of your being. It's about being sensitive to those subtle energies.
Okay, so everyone has these powers to some degree.
That's what they suggest, yeah. But they warn against using them for personal gain. Those powers are meant for helping humanity evolve, not for getting ahead.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. What about clairvoyance? That's always been a fascinating one for me.
Oh yeah, they have a whole section on that.
Mm,
What it is, how it works, and even how to develop it.
okay, I'm all ears.
They start by explaining clairvoyance as an extension of normal sight. It's like seeing those subtle realms that are normally invisible.
So like seeing auras.
That's one example. They describe the astral body as this luminous, egg-shaped form, and the mental body as even more radiant and closely tied to thought.
And they say that thoughts create vibrations in the mental body.
Yep, and those vibrations can radiate outwards and even influence other minds.
So basically, we're all broadcasting our thoughts all the time.
Kind of, yeah.
Whoa. Okay, so if you had astral sight, what would you see?
Well, they say you can see the etheric double, which is like the energetic blueprint of the physical body.
So you could, like, see if someone was sick?
Potentially, yeah.
Right.
And they imagine a world where astral sight is widespread. It could revolutionize medicine, communication, even transportation.
Wow, that's a huge change. No more traffic jams.
Exactly. And they talk about how clairvoyance could help us understand those unseen dimensions better, things that science currently struggles to explain.
Okay, so it's like expanding the frontiers of science through inner perception.
Right. And they mention Mrs. Besant's concept of the three paths: power, wisdom, and love. They say that clairvoyance could help you advance on any of those paths.
Makes sense.
Uh,
Okay, what about the practical implications?
That's the last section. Theosophy in every day.